David, I'm going to go recruit some more help.
Oh yeah, it's fine. Ooh, I'm live now. I'm going to scroll back real quick because I wanted to show you, we'll get there. I'll have to go all back again, but this will give you the look at my family. So there's because my wife and I, Elizabeth and I, there on the left is my son and his wife, Hope. And on the right is my other son, Eric, and his wife, Melanie. She's the Peruvian in the family, as you can tell. And then my grandson, who I dearly love. I just got a little video from my son with him. He found some boots there in the entryway of their house. These are Papa's boots. He said, no, they're not Papa's boots. But he and I have a real special bond, and so we love being together. So that's my family. It's good to have all of you here. I'm going to ask this question again because I think it's important to it's important to kind of know what we're looking at. Are you coming today with any burning questions or anything that you say, well, I really hope he talks about this because this is the thing that's just on the front of my mind. So, are there any questions that you've got that you want to address? And we got a question yesterday that we'll be talking about a little bit later on. But anything at all today? And the way we're going to do this is very informal. We got a small group, so feel free to jump in with questions at any point. You're not interrupting. We're having a dialogue, so that's a lot more fun that way. And so feel free to, as we go, say, oh, what about this? And we'll chase a few rabbits as we go, and that's all part of the fun. Yesterday, just in a quick review, we were looking at these 7 building blocks. We talked about 2, I think, really kind of foundational ones. The idea of grace. In other words, what are we passing on? We're the primary faith educators of our children. We're passing on our faith. Well, what is it? And we talked yesterday that a lot of young people today have a real misunderstanding about what faith is in general. We talked about theistic moralistic deism, which basically says God is this vending machine in the sky that I could ask for what I need, but isn't really involved in my life, and how our children got that idea of faith from us, unfortunately. So we talked about grace being the idea of trusting the work of the Spirit in my life, day by day, surrendering my life to Him, allowing His love to fill me. This idea we mentioned this morning of finding a love so compelling that we'll spend the rest of our life searching for us. And that's the idea of grace. Warmth is, we all have those family memories where everything was just perfect, and everyone felt really close and bonded, and that sense of warmth and community as a family is one of the leading indicators of faith transmission. If your family is not warm, if you don't have any of those just glowing family memories, it's difficult for faith to be transmitted. It doesn't mean that every moment is warm and magic and glowing, because we all know there are days where everything's falling apart, and that's okay. But we talked about those 2 items yesterday, and feel free to jump in. So we're going to look at, and we're going to move through these quickly so we don't spend all afternoon here, but community, connection, communication, boundaries, and service. So we're going to move quick, but don't hesitate to jump in and ask questions. If we need to chase a few things, we will do that. So let's talk about community. There's a great quote here. This is by David Elkind in a book he wrote. It says, there is little or no place for adolescents in American society today. I said, well, that sounds really harsh. But I think you're going to see in just a moment that there's a lot of truth to what he said. So what if our church is that place where adolescents, where young people know that they belong and they fit? So this is what we're going to talk about. I think to understand the need for community, we need to understand what's happening in adolescence today. 100 years ago, adolescence was a little blip on the radar. We went from 13 to 14, and suddenly I'm an adult. And society treated you as an adult in that way 100 or so years ago. Not so anymore. Adolescence is a journey that begins as young as 11 and 12. And we mark adolescence, the easiest way to kind of mark the start of puberty is with females, and that's just gotten younger and younger as time has gone on, and that's a whole other topic. But then we move now, as we get into adulthood, delayed adulthood. We're now in the mid to late 20s before some people are really entering fully into that adult world, which means adolescence has gotten stretched into this huge, massive amount of time. So just a few things we'll click these. It used to be just you had early and late adolescence now, and as adolescence, early adolescence is very concrete thinking, the world is black and white. As you moved into later adolescence, now you're capable of more abstract thinking. But with the lengthening of adolescence, now we have this mid-adolescent period. We're moving from dependent to interdependent, working with each other, to more independent in the middle. But in mid-adolescence, it's this, what they call egocentric abstraction. So I can think abstractly, but it's still a very me-centered world. And you'll see this with young people today, very self-centered, able to think abstractly, but it's all focused on me. So we have this tightrope that young people are walking over a 15 or plus year period. And Chap Clark, who wrote a book called Hurt, that's one name title. He rewrote the book with some different editions, Hurt 2.0. It's been out a while, it's worth reading. He spent 9 months in a public middle school doing substitute teaching with a purpose of trying to figure out what's going on in adolescence today. And he discovered that adolescents, this is the term he used, are being systemically abandoned in culture today. As David Elkind said, there's no place for adolescents. All the societal anchor points are all being ripped away. Young people today turn to what he calls the world beneath. That is their friend group. They'll tell their friends what's really going on. They won't tell anybody else. I had a teenage girl one time in a seminar I was teaching on church attendance and why should I go to church and that kind of thing. And it was a very interesting seminar. It was one of those times where you're in a group of young people and you realize, this just isn't connecting. So we just sort of stopped everything and started asking questions. We asked this girl about her church experience. And she said, my church thinks they know who I am, but they have no idea. No one takes the time to really get to know me. I said, wow, that's going to be hard. I said, what's that going to do for your church attendance? Well, she said, when I go to college, I'm going to Oakwood University. I love Oakwood. I love the church. I'm going to go to church there. So I'm really excited about being there during my college years. I said, yeah, but what about after college? When you come back home and you come back to your church, and this church that doesn't know who you are, what are you going to do then? She said, I just won't go. And that's the problem. No one really knows what's going on in the world. If you want to know what's going on, you have to enter their world. And Chap Clark spent a lot of time in those 9 months getting to know these kids and gaining their trust. And he would sit down and have conversations with them. And these young people would say, hey, do you want to know what's really going on in my world? Yeah, I'd love to know. Yeah, my parents, they're actually divorced, but they just haven't told anybody yet. And they're waiting until after I graduate. Oh, I didn't know that. Another girl says, yeah, me too. These are the kind of things that we don't hear about, we don't see, we don't know about, because it takes a long time to gain trust as adults, to enter into this world beneath. It's time, trust, a lot of listening, which we're going to talk about today. And so this is the world of adolescence today, which is why community is so important, because they're going through life, they're going through this time period. It's so formative with no support network, walking the tightrope with no net underneath them, except their own friends. And that's a kind of a fickle safety net, as we all know. So here's a quote from Chap Clark, comes out of the book Hurt. It says, this may seem to be a harsh and sweeping claim of systemic abandonment, but when we consider the decreasing time and willingness of adults to simply be there for kids during the past few decades, whether teachers, neighbors, coaches, parents, youth workers, kids have less social capital than at any point in history. They feel it, they know it. Who listens to me, they ask. Who respects me? Who really cares? They're desperately looking to find answers to that question. One reason why camp is so powerful is because it's young adults that are leading it. They don't see young adults as adults yet. They see them as their peers. And so they'll go into a cabin with a young adult counselor, and they'll open up their whole story to them. Friday nights at camp, they gather around the lake, and they tell the stories of their life. I had one girl, right after camp was over, she got home to the news that her parents were getting a divorce. That often happens. Parents will send their kids to camp so they can do their dirty work, and then the kid comes back, guess what? We're divorced now. You know, that's more common than we like to think. So this young girl hung on to that pain for an entire year. She had no one to talk to. She didn't know where to turn. She didn't know what to do. But she knew if she could get back to camp, she'd have that Friday night along the lake where she could tell her story. And she waited a year holding that and came to camp and told what had gone on. And as the counselor told her, all the girls in her cabin gathered around her, embraced her, and cried with her and hugged her. Why can't the church be that kind of community? And as a family, we need to create an environment where we are there for our children, listening and being involved in the world. Only 45% of middle school and high school students have 3 or more caring adults outside of their parents who they can turn to it for advice and support. And this is the problem. They don't have any significant adult connections. There's real power to intergenerational community in the life of a child. In a study of 500 youth group graduates, so these are people who've left high school, they've left their youth group. I'll read it down here. Bringing the generations to sit shoulder to shoulder or look eye to eye through intergenerational worship, intergenerational relationship was more important for long-term faith transmission than any other youth group activity. All the things you might do in a youth group, the most significant thing is the intergenerational connections in faith transmission for a child. Chap Clark, as he reflected on his experience in the research he had done, he said every child needs 5 significant adult relationships. That's 5-to-1 mentoring is something that we talk a lot about. It used to be we'd say, oh, we need to have 1 adult for every 5 kids. No, we need 5 adults for every 1. So what does that look like? What would that look like in our home? How can we begin to build these relationships? Because as parents, we need to take that initiative and make that happen. I can tell you from personal experience that my children were impacted by the significant adults in their world. I mentioned last night Scott and Tammy Baker, who were camp managers with us at Sunset Lake. They had a son named Nolan, a daughter as well, but Nolan was really the one that was closest to my son's age. Scott and Tammy became surrogate parents for our children, worked alongside of us to support them. If they weren't at our house, they were at Scott and Tammy's house. And when Scott and Tammy moved away, both my kids cried. They were not criers, but both of them cried. Both of them wrote multi-page letters to Scott and Tammy, thanking them for what they'd done in their lives. And they still talk about them to this day. It's really significant things. So help your children engage with these adult relationships. Some ideas: a 5-to-1 wallet card. Develop a card that goes into your child's wallet with the names and phone numbers of 5 adults that they can call at any time. Have your child get in touch with them and say, you're one of my 5. I've got your phone number in my wallet. And boy, if I ever need anything, I'm going to call you. What an honor to be named, one of the 5. 5-to-1 wall is a really cool idea. We do a lot of small group ministries in churches. Why not start a small group ministry in your home, but make it intergenerational? Bring adults, bring kids, get them interacting together, and begin to build those relationships that way. Have a girls' night out, if you've got daughters at home, you and your daughters, find some other women in the church and go out and do something fun together. Or guys, take your sons, find a couple other men in the church and go out on a fishing trip or go out and do something fun together. Begin to put adults in the path of your children. Birthday blessing is a really cool thing. I watched my own extended family do this. My brother did this with his 2 daughters. When they reached their 12th birthday, so they're kind of entering into that adolescent world, They invited all the people, the adults that had significant connections with their children, from the church, from the rest of their family. They all came, and every one of those people wrote a letter to that child having a birthday. And they sat in the room, and they read their letters to this child, and they told these children, I'm here for you, I believe in you, whatever you need, just call me anytime. And then that child got all those letters in a notebook, which they're able to keep. What a powerful moment for a kind of a rite of passage birthday. It's a cool thing for a church to do is a Sabbath school parent-teacher conference. We do this all the time for school, right? But why not have your Sabbath school teachers invite the parents in on Sabbath morning and sit down and talk about what are we doing this quarter in our Sabbath school? Here's what your kids are doing, and beginning to build those connections that way. Find adults with common interests with your child. If your kid loves to work on cars, that was my oldest son, loved working on cars. Find somebody in your church with that skill. Say, hey, could you come over and teach my son how to change the oil in our car? It'd be fun. Or a kid like me who loved airplanes. There's someone in the church that loved to fly. Hey, could you take my son up for a flight and just introduce him to flying and tell him why you love flying? Intentionally build those connections. Have your kids join a Pathfinder club or an adventure club, because you're putting your kids in the path of other adults who are interested in mentoring and investing in children. I knew a church, and this is just an idea for your church as a whole, who took this very seriously, this whole 5-to-1 mentoring, and they spent some time observing the behavior of children in church. Which doors did they come in? Where did they sit in church? When they left, where did they go? You don't have a balcony here, but when I grew up, all the kids sat up on the balcony of the church, way in the back, as far as they could go. Well, they figured out where all the kids were at any time in the given service, and they put adults in all those places for the purpose of engaging them. So wherever these kids went, there's an adult. I can't get away from them. That's awesome. They're building those relationships. So these are some ideas to build this 5-to-1 mentoring and to build community. As parents, don't just sort of, well, I hope it happens. Take the initiative and begin to build that kind of community for your child. It'll be amazing. Connection. Any questions on that before we go to the next building block? Cool. It's just a fun one. I really love the idea. Imagine, if you will, that we have a jar of 936 marbles. That's how many weeks that you have to connect with your child. From birth to the time they leave home to go to college. Roughly 936 weeks, give or take. And you think, that's a long time. I remember sitting, this is actually my grandson, holding him for the first time, but I remember sitting there holding my son, Eric, for the very first time in the hospital. My wife was recovering, and she was tired, and I spent most of the day holding Eric and thinking, wow, my whole world has just changed, But I was thinking about my life and my time with my son, and it felt like just such a long time. But I can tell you, for those of you who have raised kids all the way into adulthood, it goes like that. I don't know if this video will play. It may not be linked in. Oh, it is good. There's no good. Take a look how quick things can change. That's not good. We'll go with that. Kids ever run in the wall? styles. There's no right or wrong parenting style. The best parenting style is the one that works for you and the one that lets your child know that you love them. For us, we read a book by Dr. Sears on attachment parenting. We didn't do everything the book talked about, but the whole point of attachment parenting was to say, utilize your physical relationship, your emotional relationship with your child, your spiritual relationship with your child. Build these connections with your child. So as an infant, you were always there for that child. We held our children a lot. My wife had something that would carry them. Going to the grocery store, they're always being held and touched. And we did not farm our child off to daycare. Nothing wrong with doing that. My grandson goes to daycare. But for us, we wanted that connection. And so it was a lot of work, but it paid off for us in the end. The question is, how do we build spiritual attachments throughout a child's life? For a lot of parents, they look at the 10 minutes of family worship and they think, this is where it's at. We've got to get our family together and we're going to have worship. And it's going to be a great thing, right? Because we're going to sit on the couch together and the kids are going to snuggle close and we'll all listen as Dad reads the Bible and it'll be just this wonderful time of family togetherness. I don't know who took this picture, but they had never lived in my house, because this is what family worship looked like at my house. Chaos, utter chaos. You know, I had two boys who were very active, and it took 20 minutes just to get them into the singing room and settle down. And then the moment they're all sitting on the couch and you're ready to open up the Bible and read, someone pokes the other one and a fight breaks out and it just all goes downhill really quick. Or you get them in the same room and they're all sitting down and everyone's really quiet and one of my kids burps or passes gas or whatever, and then no one's paying attention anymore. That was family worship. But then you walk away thinking, I am such a failure. I'm never going to help my kids to walk in faith. And then it hit me after a while, why am I judging my success in passing my faith to my children on one tiny little 10-minute window of the day when there's 24 hours where I get to impact them? And maybe what I do in the other 23 hours and 50 minutes is more important than what happens in that little 10-minute window. And maybe you ought to be thinking about that more than what happens there. Not saying that we shouldn't do family worship, but don't make that the do or die kind of thing in your faith transmission. There are a lot of ways where we can find connecting points throughout the day to impact them for Jesus. Meal times. Oh, easy. We're sitting down and having conversation with a meal or whatever it might be. Diaper changing time. My grandson, so funny. We're sitting down, we're at his house last weekend, and he had spent the week with us. We brought him back to meet with his parents, and we're at the house, and my grandson's loaded his diaper. It's time for the diaper change. My son is taking him out to change his diaper, and he says, I want Papa to do it. It's like, great, thanks so much, But those diaper changing moments, though they might be somewhat unpleasant at times, are great connecting points. There he goes. There she goes. It's awesome. He's going to have one of those connecting moments right now. And because you can talk to them, you can have fun and play with them. And I have a routine with my grandson. I'll say, you are such a good boy. You know why you're good? You know why you're a good boy? It's because Jesus made you special. I want him to know that he's not a good boy because he does good things. It's not about what he does, it's about who he is. He's a child of God, which means he's very good. Drive times, bath time, play time, bedtime, story time, late night talks. These are all connecting points. All through the day, we have moments where we can just have a quick conversation or say a short prayer or have a moment where there's a teachable moment. I drove my kids to school every day. It was a 10-minute drive, not a very long drive. But those 10 minutes there and 10 minutes back were like gold. For 4 years where I did this every day, and we were able to unpack the day and find out what was going on. Late night talks, we mentioned this last night. My two boys, when they got to be teenagers, they knew I liked cold cereal, so we each pour a bowl of cold cereal about midnight, and we're sitting on bar stools out there in the kitchen, eating cold cereal and just letting the conversations go. It's really awesome. These are all connecting points where we can weave spiritual life into the day. If you want to download this app, I would encourage you. You can scan the code on the screen there. Parent Cue is a really cool app from an organization called Orange, which is an organization designed to build bridges between home and church. And the Parent Cue app is an app that gives you parenting tips every week and gives you little devotionals you can do with your kids. It's based on all the phases. So it starts with 0 to 3, goes all the way up into high school. And as your child grows, you get different content that comes with it. If you can search for a church, because often churches will connect the app. If you want to, right now the Parent Cue app is connected with Sunset Lake Camp. So if you do a church search, put Sunset Lake Camp in, and you can link with the camp. And we occasionally put up announcements of what's going on at camp or things like that. But all the apps are there. It's a really cool thing because you can customize. We don't have the staffing at camp to do it right now, but you can put your own content in. But Orange has some really cool stuff. This is a great way to find ways to connect and resources to use to do it. So did everybody get that? I don't want to go too fast if you didn't scan that. Okay, cool. They have a book called It's Just a Phase, so don't miss it. And it's an awesome book which goes through the whole life cycle of a child, 0 to 18, and how are they growing and developing? How do we connect them with Jesus throughout these phases? What should we be talking about? Where are their interests? It's a great book to get for parents to help you build a spiritual plan for your child. I'll just show you. Oh, it suddenly stopped changing on me. So I got to go back. See if you can advance that there. Did it freeze on us? Anyway, there it is. They've got this, and you can't read it from here. That's not the point. But they have these great charts that go through all the phases and just show everything of how a child grows, matures. And I read this book, I thought, oh, I have so much more understanding about my kids. And so it's a resource worth getting. Plus, they have these books for every phase where you can go in and little workbooks, information that you can go. So there's incredible content through the Parent Cue app and the Orange Phase Project, which if you want to use, these are great connectors. As your kids get older, a couple things I recommend. You see them on the screen here. I also brought physical copies with me. There's 2 books. One is the Sticky Guide, the Sticky Faith Guide for your family. I've taken some of the content out of this book. Growing With is another book out of Fuller Youth Institute, which is helping parents of teenagers and young adults to grow with their children and to build those relationships and keep those connecting points into adulthood. And the basic premise of the book is that we as parents need to grow with our children, our young adult children. Be a part of that learning process with them. Really great content in that book. If there's interest, I'm trained in doing a whole seminar on that, it's really great content. So these are all tremendous tools as you think about staying spiritually connected with your children. Let's talk about a few more things. Oh yeah, go ahead. Oh, the training, the Growing With training is usually like a day-long or afternoon seminar, which walks through the basic principles of the book. I got training to teach this material. Well, that's something I have to come back and do a presentation on. Yeah, so, but get the book. It's a great way to introduce yourself to the content, and it's really great stuff in there. So, good. Practical ideas. First of all, if you want to connect with your kids, slow down. Just slow down. We rush so much in our world. Always going, always doing. Don't get caught in the trap of always having to entertain your children or take them to this event or that event. Schools and churches don't always have your best interests at heart, and I say this as a pastor. We tend to schedule ourselves to death. When I pastored, the last church I pastored, we took one day out of the week and we said nobody does anything in the church on this day. No meetings, nothing. Nothing happened at the church on, I think it was Tuesday. It was just, church is closed on Tuesdays, so don't plan anything. And we said, in turn, we want you as a family to take that day for your kids. But if no one's doing that for you, you make that decision. Slow down. Get involved in what your child loves. I had a pastor who came to me one time and said, my kids know, he was kind of proud of this, my kids know that if they want to spend time with me, they have to get involved in what I'm doing. It's like, I would love to be able to go back to this pastor and say, where are your kids now? Because I have a feeling they're not around. Because that gets old really fast for a child. Child figures out that they're not your number one priority. Get involved in what your kids love. My dad was a great mentor of mine. And he had a young man in his congregation that loved trains. Nobody else in his family did. And he would talk on and on about trains. And everybody else in his family would get bored of it and walk away. And my dad would sit and listen by the hour, talk about trains. My dad kind of loved trains too. He grew up around the railroad and knew a lot of stuff. And so they would compare notes. And my dad built this incredible relationship with this young man because he would take an interest in what he loved. So do it with your kids. Make a spiritual growth plan for each one of your children. Have a plan of what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, how you're going to utilize those connecting points. Use the Parent Cue app. Use the material from Orange. Make it up on your own if you want. But have a plan. Don't just do it randomly by accident. Take time to teach your children how to be an adult. Men, show them how to take care of the car. My dad, after my oldest brother was killed in a car accident back when I was in high school, he would come back around to this one memory over and over, and oftentimes with tears in his eyes. He would tell a story about we were there, my oldest brother was pastoring in New York, and my dad came over and said, you did change oil in your car. And he said, well, I would, but you never taught me how, my oldest son told him. And my dad lived with regret, having never taught his oldest son that basic skill. We can teach our children how to take care of the car, how to do laundry. My mom made sure that all of us guys knew how to cook before we left home. And my wife thanks me every day for that. Because I love to cook, and so that's good, So teach your kids how to be adults. Start early. Those are great connector points. Ask your kid, how can I pray for you today? Every night. We talked about this last night. Every night, there in bed, just say, what can I pray for? What's a prayer request you have? I want to be praying for you. The high school Bible. Michael Card, who's a great Bible scholar, a great musician, he's done this for every one of his children. Now he's doing it for every one of his grandchildren. He gets a study Bible. It has room to take notes in it. And he reads through the entire Bible with his grandchild in mind. And he makes notes in the margins for his grandchild. And when that grandchild reaches high school, he gives him the Bible that he has read through and filled it with notes only for that child. Can you imagine what a gift that would be? Wow. I don't know if you have time to do that, but what a cool idea. Not only is it growing your faith, but it is giving that child or grandchild a legacy of faith that they will treasure the rest of their life. Really, really cool stuff. So that's connection. Any questions, any thoughts that's generating? It's good stuff. Let's talk about communication. Leadership begins with listening. Scott Kermode is one of my favorite leadership authors and speakers out of Fuller Youth Institute. First time I heard him speak, I thought, where was this information when I started pastoring? Just really good stuff. Leadership really does begin with listening. Communication begins with listening. Faith transmission begins with listening, not proclaiming. That's really important to know. There's a Bible story that I want to quickly walk us through because it's so powerful. You remember the story of the woman with the issue of blood. She's there and she's saying to herself, if I can just get to Jesus, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, I know that I'll be made whole. And that wasn't just a random thought. There was actual scriptural evidence that they knew that the Messiah would have healing in the tassel of his garment. So she's taking a step of faith here. She's saying, I know this man is the Messiah, and I believe what the Word of God says, and I'm going to touch the hem of his garment that I know that I'll be made whole. And so she fights her way through the crowd. The interesting thing is, Jesus is on his way to heal this Jairus' daughter who's literally about to die. And so Jairus is tugging on Jesus' arm through this crowd of people, and here comes this woman, touches the hem of his garment, and Jesus stops. And Jairus is thinking, no, don't stop. But Jesus stops. And who touched me? And like, well, people all around you. But Jesus kept looking and looking until he found this woman. And some versions, I love the way some versions say it. When he finally finds her, he gets down on her level. That's how I imagine it. And she tells him the whole story. She'd been sick for 12 years. She'd been going to doctor after doctor. Every one of them made it worse. Every one of them took advantage of it. She couldn't be around people. She couldn't go to synagogue. She was really an outcast in society. People wouldn't touch her because they would be unclean. She was a broken woman. And you don't tell that story in a couple of sentences. And Jesus sat on the curb with Jairus tugging on her arm. And he listened to her story. And then he says to her, your faith has healed you. Now, there's an interesting little twist in the story because she reaches out, touches the garment, and the Bible says she's cured. But Jesus knows that she needs something else. How does he know that? Well, when she says to herself, if I could just touch the hem of her garment, I know that I'll be made whole. The word that's used in Greek is sozo, which means literally made whole, physically, emotionally, everything. When she reaches out and touches the tassel of Jesus' garment, she doesn't get what she wanted. She gets laomai. She's cured. Physical healing, but nothing more. She needs something else, and Jesus knows it, and so he comes looking for her. And he sits on the curb and listens to her whole story. And then he reaches out, and I imagine that Jesus brushes away the tears, and he says the words that she's been longing to hear. Your faith has sozoed you. He gives her what she's longing for, and he makes her whole. So what's the difference between the curing touch and the pronouncement of Jesus that you've been made whole? It's the listening ear of Jesus. That's so powerful. And that's what young people need today. When we think about communication, this generation needs someone to sit on the curb with them and listen to their whole story. Empathy. That's where it begins. And that's the gift that we give our children day in and day out. What's happening in your world? What's it like to be you? Tell me your story. Tell me what's going on. Faith transmission happens when we have better conversations, not better answers. Young people oftentimes aren't looking for the answers, they're looking for conversation, for dialogue, and that's really important. So what do? We do that by listening. Listening is so important. My dad used to tell me, you got 2 ears, 1 mouth, God was trying to tell you something. Yeah, so I was like, yeah, I know. My dad was a great listener, and he was a chaplain at a hospital, and he was on call, and sometimes 4 times a day he would get a call. Someone's died, come and be with the family. Those are hard moments, and when you get those calls, all your adrenaline kicks in. Oh, there's an emergency, I gotta go. My dad learned early on that was a really bad way to enter the room in that kind of a situation, all out of breath and kind of panicked. So he would stop when he got those calls and take a few deep breaths, and he would walk to the emergency room. And all the way as he walked to the emergency room, he'd be asking God to give him peace. And then he would walk into that room where the family was, and you can imagine the chaos in those moments, all the stress and all the fear and the grief and everything going on. And my dad would walk into that room without saying a word, and he would sit in a chair and just be still. And he would wait. And sometimes it was a few minutes, sometimes it was longer, until finally everyone realized, oh, there's someone in the room. And the stress and the anxiety would begin to fade, and everyone would turn their attention towards him. And then he was able to step in quietly and begin to minister to the needs of that family. Really, really cool stuff. So listening is so important. Radical empathy, I love this term. This is where I say, I want to understand you. I want to enter into your world. I want to understand what it's like to be you. And Jesus does this again and again, and I think as parents, we need to have empathy for our children. We're so often reactionary. You know, a kid comes home and they pierce their ears. What did you do? You know, we react, you know. And maybe it's better just not to. A pastor friend of mine, he told me, he said, one time I was home and this awful noise came up from my son's upstairs room. I think it was music. I don't know, but it just sounded like a lot of noise and screaming. And I thought, what is going on? And I was headed up to my son's room. I was going to tell him to turn that noise off. And he said, I opened the door, and the Holy Spirit clamped his hand over my mouth. And I said, I'm really glad he did, because I saw my son sitting there listening to this music with tears running down his eyes. He says, Dad, you gotta listen to these lyrics. Now, I didn't know there was such a thing, but there is. It's called Christian Screamo music. There you go. August Burns Red. My son loves to play drums, and so he's into it as well, because they have great drum parts. It's not my thing, I'm just going to tell you. But the lyrics are amazing, because I've read them. And here's his son just weeping because he's meeting Jesus in the middle of all this chaos. But that's radical empathy, entering into a child's world and not reacting, not judging, but just trying to understand. A great response in a conversation with a child. Child can come and say, I had a really bad day. Tell me more about that. Yeah. These kinds of responses open dialogue rather than shut it down. I had a really bad day. Oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. What do you want for supper? You know, no, take that time and tell me more about that. And these kinds of responses really do a great job. And then respect. Be willing to respect your child, no matter what they tell you, no matter what's going on in their life. Don't judge, don't react, just listen and respect their story. It's really important. Listen for the language of longing. This is and I will say there's going to be a link at the end if you want to download this slide deck, which would be good because there's a lot of content. But this is something that Chap Clark and his wife put out in a book. I think it may be still in print. It's been out a while. You can tell how much the title is Disconnected: Parenting Teens in a MySpace World. Like, MySpace? What on earth is that? You know, that's a dated book, but really great content. And this chart was in the book. It shows what a child says, what we hear, and what they actually mean. So cool. Child says to you, you don't know me. And we hear, oh, I don't matter to her. But what the child's really saying is, I long to belong. I mean, you don't know me, but I want you to know me. I want to belong. And if we listen to the longing, we can, rather than reacting to the statement, we can give them what they're asking for, what they're longing for. You never listen to me. And we hear, he doesn't want to listen to me. But what they're saying is, I long to be taken seriously. Would you take my interest seriously? That's what I really long for. I can do it. So our little kids, you know, when they're starting to be able to do things on their own, I can do it. Just leave me alone, you know. She doesn't need me. What they're really saying is, I long to matter. I long to make a difference. I'm fine, okay? You hear these statements? She wants, and we think, oh, he wants to be left alone. No, I long to be uniquely me. And I'm in this stage of life where I'm trying to find out who I am. And maybe if you could just come along and guide me in that journey, it would be great. Last one, nobody cares about me. You'll hear this from time to time. Sometimes we think that means he doesn't care about anyone but himself. But what he's really saying is, I long to be wanted. But these kinds of things, if we can, rather than react, listen to what's really going on underneath. Our children will feel heard, will feel valued, and they'll be more likely to come to you with the things that are really burdening them. If we can come to them and have these kinds of conversations. What do we do with doubt? You know, a child comes to you, a teenager comes to you and says, I don't know if I really believe in this church thing anymore. What? You know, and we react, right? What do you mean, you know, I've spent all these years in Christian education. You don't believe in God anymore? You know, a better response would be, tell me more. Tell me more about that. But here's a statement from Kara Powell that I love. It's not doubt that's toxic. It's silence. She tells a story about a boy that goes to church. On the way out, the pastor's at the door, and he comes up and he says, if I hold up one or two fingers, does God know how many fingers I'm going to hold up before I do it? Yeah, I think God does, the pastor says. Okay, well, does he know about this? And he pulls a picture out of his pocket that he clipped from a Newsweek magazine of a starving child in Ethiopia. Does God know about this? In that moment, the pastor had a chance to address this young boy's doubt and confusion over how could God allow bad things to happen. But instead, the pastor gave a flip, yeah, God knows about that, and kind of brushed it off. And Steve Jobs, because that's who it was, Steve Jobs walked out of that church and never darkened the door of a church again. What would have happened had that pastor not met that young Steve Jobs with silence or a quick pat answer, but really engaged him with that doubt? What difference could it have made in our world today? It's not doubt that's toxic, it's silence. Don't be alarmed when your child begins to doubt. It's a natural part of the faith journey. Your child begins their faith journey in a very concrete black and white world, and God is very black and white. And he's very predictable. And then as we get older, all of a sudden this God that I thought I knew is over here doing things that don't make any sense to me. Well, then how do I know that God's even real? Because he's not doing the things that I thought he's supposed to do. And he's not answering my prayer. And he's letting my grandma die when I prayed to heal her. And nothing makes sense anymore. And so I don't know if I believe in God, because the God I knew back there when I was 5 isn't the God I know today. And so we have to guide a child through that discovery process and begin to develop a deeper relationship with Jesus and to broaden their understanding of who he is. So doubt is a part of the journey. It's just a part of the process of growing up. Every child doubts. You and I did growing up, and we just have to remember that. So some ideas for better communication at home: ask questions, but share your own faith story as well. Avoid win-lose discussions. Don't get into an argument where one person is going to win and one person is going to lose, because before you even get started in that, you've already lost. I mean, even if you win, you've lost. So don't do it. Christian parents, very interesting in a study, are less likely to talk about tricky subjects than non-Christian parents. They're less likely to talk about drug use or items dealing with sexuality or all those difficult topics. It's interesting that we avoid it. So buck the trend. Jump in and have those conversations. One of the things I did with my children, I had 2 boys, so I was the one that did it. We did a program called Passport to Purity. It's still available. Look for it online. And if you have sons, the dad takes that child who's turning 12, takes that child on a weekend of their choosing. They get to choose what you do for the weekend. Something they're really going to love, and then you walk them through this curriculum, dealing with sexual purity, dealing with preparing them for choosing a marriage partner. All these things are in that weekend that you spend together. I did it with both my boys. It was really a great experience. We had a lot of fun together too. Moms have a special role in faith conversations. Last time we talked about how dads are key in developing warmth. Moms have the critical role when it comes to faith conversations. It seems that that's one of the key things that transmits faith. So moms, talk to your kids about faith. Watch your child's favorite movie. Listen to their favorite song, and then talk about what you're learning. Talk what you liked, what you didn't like. I'll give you a great resource at the end, Center for Parent and Youth Understanding. They actually give you tools and resources to evaluate all the latest media choices that your kids are listening to. So rather than just saying, don't listen to that trash, you can sit down and listen to it together and actually walk them through. What are we listening to? What do you think this means? What are the values here? And help them process and begin to be discerning in their media choices. Great ideas. Any questions on that before we jump into, we're blazing through today. Yeah?
You said avoiding the noise and discussion, because you said you lost the rating.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. Let's just use an example. Your son comes to you and says, I don't know if I believe in God anymore. Now I'm gonna prove to you that God exists. In other words, I'm gonna have a discussion that is all about me letting you know that I'm right and you're wrong. The moment you get into a discussion where I'm trying to prove my point and make you understand that I know what I'm talking about and you don't, even if you can make that happen, and we can, as adults, we can often win the argument. The child writes you off before you even start because they're not listened to, they're not respected, and they're not heard. The goal of conversation is for that child to be heard and to be able to talk to what they're feeling. And sometimes that's all they're wanting. And so avoid those kind of discussions. Come at them from different angles rather than I'm right and you're wrong, because it creates too much conflict. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you talk more about the, where you put this on the fourth bullet, like if and dads have a special role in warmth and moms have a special role in faith, where that comes from? Is it because like moms maybe more typically are giving warmth, and so it's a special push, but maybe dads aren't particularly warm, and similarly true for moms, or like what? Yeah.
I've wondered myself, because the research says they asked the question of like 500 young people, and they tracked them over a 35-year period. The question, they looked at faith transmission for a child who said, I wasn't close, I didn't feel warmth from my dad, and those that did, and there was a 45% difference in faith transmission. And they asked the question of parents about their moms, if you felt warmth from your mom or you didn't feel warmth from your mom, there was only a 1% difference in faith transmission, which is interesting. And I've wondered that what you're wrestling, and the research didn't delve into why does that occur, but I think moms just naturally have that warmth. I think some of his dads are less likely to play that role, and so, and dads, when dads step in, for instance, into their daughter's life, dads and daughters, those are really powerful relationships, and with sons as well, but I wonder if it's more impactful because oftentimes dads don't play that role.
Well, and with a special role for moms, like if I think about, and you say like talk to your kids about faith, if I think about the way I've seen women in my life witness to their faith, it's been by example and less verbally.
Mm-hmm.
And but you're saying vocalize it.
Yeah.
Don't just be ignorant.
Right. The example is powerful, but sit down and say, let me tell you how I came to know Jesus. Those kinds of conversations are really powerful. Last night I told the group that my dad wrote a book. Or did I just tell you this? I wrote a book on his faith journey. And I have that book. And I treasure that because I have a continual witness that I'll hand on to my kids and onto their kids about how faith transformed my dad's life. Really cool stuff. This is, when we talk about parenting, everyone's in the back of the mind is like, okay, when are we going to talk about discipline? Here we go. We're going to use the term boundarying, and this is a term that comes out of this book, Disconnected, by Chap and D. Clark, two really giants in youth ministry. I love this quote. We're going to come back and look at it a second time, but home should be a place where we create the world we want our kids to live in and inspire them to reimagine what is possible when they leave. Home ought to be a place where we get to shape what happens in those four walls and how we function. And we should create a world that we want our kids to live in. And discipline and boundarying is all about placing. At camp, we talk about four things. We talk about a sandbox. This is boundarying. A sandbox has four walls. The four walls of camp are grace, community, adventure, and belonging. Those are the key things that form the boundaries of our experience. And we place those boundaries to give our kids room to play, room to grow, room to experience life. And so we want to create boundaries that are healthy and strong, and that's what we're going to talk about. I have a real problem with punishment. this idea of punishment. And I'll tell you why. A story that happened to me, my own personal experience. My oldest son was 3 years old. You know, the first children always get experimented on. So true. You know, we're trying to figure out what parenting is all about. And I remember we're on vacation, and we're up in Mackinac City, Michigan, right up along Lake Michigan. We rented a cabin there, and you can go out to the beach and see the Mackinac Bridge, and we spent a day over in the island, Mackinac Island, and so we're out there playing on the beach. And I don't even remember what my son did, but he did something to disobey, and I told him not to, and he did, and now I'm starting to get angry, right? And my wife and I had talked about, is there ever a moment in our lives when we think we're going to spank our kids? And this was the moment. All right, if you don't, I'm going to give you a spanking if you don't. Of course, he did. Because anytime you say to a 3-year-old, the next time you do this, they just do it again, you know? That's the way it works. So now I'm angry. All right, you're going to get a spanking. Now, here we are in this very public space. I can't spank my kid in front of all these people I don't know. They're going to think I'm abusing my kid. So I'm going to take you back to the cabin. I'm going to give you a spanking. Well, the cabin was a fair walk away. So now I'm walking. The first little bit, I'm kind of dragging along. I didn't want to come because, you know, Dad's angry. He's angry. He knows he's going to get it. You know, and after a little bit, we start to cool down. I start to cool down. He starts to cool down. We start to have a little bit of a conversation. By the time we get back to the cabin, we sorted the whole thing out. He's good. I'm good. What's the point of the spanking, right? So, am I going to get a spanking? No, you're not going to get a spanking. So I don't even need it, you know. I didn't even have to go there. If we had just sat and talked, if we just worked through it and listened to each other's feelings, we could have solved it. Rather than the blaming and the shaming and the scolding and trying to figure out who's at fault and who gets assigned the guilt, rather than the anger and the frustration, maybe there is a better way to create boundaries. Boundarying. This is a quote from the book Disconnected. Does God want us to focus on instruction and training, keeping in mind at all times our child's developmental and spiritual progress? Or, as some at least imply, does God want us to teach kids how to comply by doling out a punishment for an offense committed? To put it more bluntly, does God want us to strategically work toward the future, or does he want us to dispense justice for the past? Whew, those are stinging words for parents. I've been there. I've done a lot of work at camp. I've been directing a summer camp for 19 summers. When a kid comes to see me, it's usually because they're in trouble. And that's kind of been my role at camp. You know? Here comes this child, and the counselor's been working with them, the village director's been working with them, and now they don't know what to do, so they're bringing this kid to me. And I'm reminded, I remind myself of this quote that we just read. Camp should be a place where we create the world we want our kids to live in. And it should inspire them to reimagine what is possible when they leave. And I think, how can I do this? And so this is not original to me. This quote actually comes from a camp called Camp Stomping Grounds. Oddly enough, not a Christian camp, and yet they understand, I think, boundarying better than anyone else. This is a term that may be familiar to you. They use a process called restorative justice. It's 3 goals. Number 1, to heal harm. Whatever harm, whatever brokenness has occurred, we want to heal that. It's the first priority. The second thing is we want to make sure that we mitigate future harm. We want to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the third thing is we want to restore community. It's so important to the process. And we do that with conversation. We sit down, at camp we call it the circle system. So when they come and sit with me, I'll give you an example. I had 2 girls who came to camp this year, and they were best friends. They actually drove together in one of the dad's cars, and they were so excited to be at camp together. And they were in the same cabin, and one of the girls began to broaden her friend circle. Now she has all this group of friends that now are making the other friend feel like she doesn't really belong. And now there's tension beginning to grow between these 2 girls. We thought we were friends, and they began to fight, and it began to affect the rest of the cabin, and nobody could seem to solve the problem. And so I sat down with them, and I said, this conversation is going to be different than any conversation you've probably ever had. Because neither of you are in trouble. You're not in trouble. So that means we don't need to worry about who's at fault today. We don't need to blame somebody. We're not trying to figure out who's to blame. We're not gonna shame anybody. That means we can talk about our feelings here. We can open up what's really going on. Each of you are gonna have a chance to talk today. I often use something called a talking stick. It's just an object. I'll like this little device. Say, if you have this in your hand, you're the only one who can talk. Everybody else has to listen. And when it's the other person's turn to talk, we'll hand it to them. Now they get to talk. It's a great little way to make sure that each other is listening. And so I'll ask 3 questions. What happened? Each of them get a chance to respond to that question briefly. Well, here's what happened. In this case, they tell their story about, feeling coming as friends, and now this person has other friends. And how did that make you feel? How do you feel right now? I'll never forget that one of the girls said, I'm just so scared I'm going to lose my friend. And that's all that needed to be said. And this girl, the other little girl, reached over and just embraced her friend and said, you're not going to lose me. You're not going to lose me. What happened there? They began to understand each other. They moved beyond the outward actions and reactions, and they began to listen to feelings and go deeper. This takes time, and it doesn't always work quite so magically. I'll just be honest with you. Sometimes it takes real work to get them to that point. This just happened. And the last question is, what do you need to move forward? And we ask that question to these girls. What do you need to move forward? Well, I think it's good for us to, if I know that when we go home, we'll still be friends, then I'm okay with my friend having other friends, and that's okay. And began, okay, so now we worked out a strategy. When you guys go home, you get to share your stories and be friends there. And they worked the whole thing out. And then when we're all done, I say to them, I am so proud of you. You guys did incredible work today. You talked about your feelings. You worked through a problem. A lot of adults couldn't do what you just did today. That is really, really amazing. And I build them up and I say, I'm so glad you guys are here at camp today. I never had to threaten. I never had to blame. Nothing. We solved the problem. Because we listened and we learned with each other. And that is an amazing process that makes a huge difference. So it's a great tool that I would encourage you to do. And sometimes the brokenness happens between parent and child. And then you have to sit down and really kind of work through that process together and be willing to listen to your child's feelings, what they're feeling towards you. Another process that will help with this is called the 5-finger contract. And this is the tool we use at camp. I start every week by sitting down with the campers all together. We sit in the grass out in front of my house, and I say, I've got 5 promises to make to you today. And they're promises I hope we can make to each other. First promise is, we use our hand to do it. My first promise is, I'm going to do everything I can this week to keep you safe. I can't guarantee you that you aren't going to, wipe out on your bike and skin your knee or break your arm even, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure that doesn't happen. But not just physical safety, also emotional safety. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that in your cabin, you're not bullied, you're not made fun of. And if I ever don't do that, if you're getting bullied and I'm not stepping in to help, I want you to come and tell me, Pastor Dave, you aren't keeping your promise. And I'll do something to make it right. Same thing with commitment. I'm making a commitment to you today that I'm going to be present this week. I'm going to be involved in your lives. I'm going to get out and do things with you. And I want you to do the same. Get out and play. Get out and have fun. Get involved. Don't just stand off the sideline. Get involved and have fun. And if you see me off to the side somewhere, not out there playing, if you see me not getting involved, call me on it. I'm going to do everything I can to respect you. And we talk about what respect is, what that looks like. If I ever do something that's not respectful to you, you have my permission to come and tell me. And I will apologize. I've had to do that, by the way. It's always a little humbling experience. I remember I was up front talking one time at the end of campfire, and these 2 boys were down front, and they were just smarting off, And so you do the old kind of pause and wait and look at their direction. And they didn't get the hint. They just kept on plowing through, you know. And I was having an off day, I guess. I don't know what. But my frustration levels began to grow. And I called them out in front of everybody. And my staff, I look at my staff, and they're like, their jaws are like on the floor, like, what is Pastor Dave doing, you know? And I'm midway through, and I think, I am so blowing this, you know, this is terrible. And I apologized to my staff, and I went to those two boys the next morning at line call and said, I owe you an apology. That wasn't right of me. I was wrong. And, you know, apologizing to your kids is one of the best things you can do to build relationship. It's so powerful. Responsibility. I'm going to take responsibility for my action. If I'm at fault, like I just told you, I'm going to own it, and I'm going to apologize, and I want you to do the same thing. And last, everything I say to you is going to be to build you up, to make you a better person. Sometimes that means we got to talk about hard things, you know. We'll have tough conversations, but I will always affirm you and build you up, no matter what. If I ever don't, call me on it. If you live these 5 promises in your home, ooh, it's good. You know, it takes some risk because you're telling your child, you can call me out. But that's okay. It's good sometimes for a child to say, hey, Mom, you know, that wasn't the most respectful thing I've ever heard from you. And you have the opportunity to make it right. This builds an environment of trust, an environment where open communication is valued and wanted and can really change the perspective. There are times when boundaries have to be set and their punishment has to happen. We talked last night about early childhood is really where a lot of your hard, fast boundaries are laid. My grandson rather, found a golf ball in our house and was throwing it around the house. Not a good thing, you know. You're going to break something. Mason, if you're welcome to roll that or hold that golf ball, but if you throw it, it could break something. If you throw it again, I'm going to have to take it away. Boundary. Well, a 2.5-year-old, first of all, the moment you say, if you throw that again, something's going to happen, their next thought is, I wonder if he really means it. Throw. Yeah, right? Yeah, that's what they do. You take it from them. And of course, a big, you know, fountain of tears erupts, but that's okay. They're testing their environment. They're wanting to make sure, do they really mean what they say? And am I really in this safe environment, this safe place? And when they figure that out, they begin to relax. They begin to know, I've got this sandbox I can play in. I know where my boundaries are. I know how I fit, and I can trust this. And that's when they begin to grow, and it's much easier then to have these conversations as they get older. A 2-year-old, 3-year-old can't have the kind of conversations we've been talking about. We have to be a little more structured. However, with a young child, what I encourage you to do to kind of prep them for this is when you get the flood of tears, say, I know this is upsetting. Can you talk to me with your words? Can you tell me what you're feeling right now? I'm sad. Why are you sad? Like Mason, he missed his mommy and daddy, so he's kind of fussing and acting out. What's going on, Mason? I'm sad. Why are you sad? I miss mommy and daddy. Oh, yeah. You love mommy and daddy very much, don't you? I understand why you'd miss them. What can I do to help? Can I give you a hug? Yes, Papa. You know? and now we make things better, but we teach them. Use your words. Let me know what you're feeling. And when you tell me what you're feeling, when you tell me what's going on, I will respond in a way that you can trust. That really opens the door for good connections and good boundarying as we move forward. Does it make sense? And you know, do you spank or not spank? I don't know that I'm going to go there. I think that's a call that you make and how you are going to function. I think the key thing is that no matter what you do, is that the child knows that they're loved. You know, I know it's parents that will spank, but then they'll immediately hold that child, let them cry. And that child knows, yeah, there was a consequence, but my mommy and daddy loved me. So I don't think it's you know, how those boundaries are drawn as important as communicating love and trust is really the important thing. Any questions, thoughts on that? Yeah.
I have a question about your example with the kids in the front row.
Mm-hmm.
I can see how it would be very easy, and I'm sure, of
And their response when I said to them, I'm sorry, they said, oh no, that's okay. We were the ones talking. They knew. And the fact that I was willing to say I reacted in the wrong way. You know, I should have come to you privately and talked to you afterwards, or I should have done some other thing. You know, we're not excusing that behavior. I'm just saying I didn't respond appropriately to your behavior. And when you do something wrong, I want to act in a way that's going to respect you. And that's how we build the trust. If I'm disrespectful in drawing the boundary, the child is like, I'm going to hide from mom and dad now when I do something wrong because I don't want to receive that. And that's what we don't want to have. Yeah.
This one here, I don't forget that we had WW, what we disappeared. These children want to hang, so I will do this. That's exactly wrong, but I will also punch patient a lot.
Yeah. I think there are times where it's helpful for us as parents to step away. You know, sometimes we just need to do that. You know, I'm going to let you be here, have your moment. I'm going to step over here. And I watched my daughter-in-law do this with you know, when Mason's throwing a fit. Mommy loves you. I'm going to let you cry here. I'm going to be over here for a moment, and then she'll come back. But take that breath. Mm. it took a lot of humility for you to accept that and grow from it. It's a really powerful example. I had a little girl, she was not listening to her counselor, and I went to talk to her, and she said, if my counselor would just yell at me, then I'd listen to her. I said, oh. I told her, I said, you have no idea what an incredible gift your counselor is giving to you, that she doesn't yell, you know. Yeah, that's good. Thanks for sharing. One last thing, and then we're going to look at a couple of some barriers. Service. This is a short section, but service is another really powerful way to do faith transmission. I love this verse in Micah 6:8. He has shown you, oh man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. I think we need to teach our children this verse. Jesus in Acts 1:8, I think, gives a model for service and how to bring it into the home. He says to his disciples, you'll be my witnesses, telling people about me everywhere, but start in Jerusalem, then throughout Judea, then Samaria, then to the ends of the world. Ends of the world. You have this outward journey with the sharing of faith. It starts at home, goes into the neighborhood, goes into the community, then it goes into the world. So what if we did that with our service training? Training our children for service doesn't have to be just a mission trip or going to feed the homeless. It starts with, hey, can you help mom do the dishes tonight? You know? Can you clean toilets? You have no idea how many young adults we bring to camp to work as staff members who don't know how to clean a toilet or don't want to clean a toilet because no one ever taught them. So teach them the very basic idea of service. Service begins with simple tasks, sometimes dirty tasks. We had some staff transitions a couple years ago at camp, and for 6 months I had to care for the horses. I felt like Moses, out herding sheep for 40 years. Fortunately, it was only 6 months and not 40 years. But I said, okay, God, if I have to be out trudging through the muck and manure, feeding horses twice a day, then teach me something. If I'm going to be like Moses, what do you have for me to learn today? And I learned so much from those horses. Your children can learn so much from simple tasks, doing the dishes, cleaning their room, picking up their toys. These are simple acts, but they begin to develop a culture of service. And that can grow. Then as kids get older, you can say, oh, hey, what can we do in our neighborhood? Hey, I noticed that the neighbor down the street, they've been in and out of the hospital a lot and not doing well, and I wonder what we could do to cheer them up. I don't know, let's take them a plate of cookies, or let's bring in some flowers, so now we go over to the neighbor and we do something nice. You begin to help them think about making a difference. And I feel good when I did that, Well, then what can we do in our community? Well, I hear they're looking for volunteers down at the animal shelter. That'd be a fun thing. Or they need help at the food pantry, and as the kids grow, you begin to expand their realms of service, and it continues to grow until finally, and I love the idea of almost a rite of passage mission trip as they're entering into adulthood. Every one of your children, make sure they get to experience that cross-cultural mission experience, because it can be very impactful. But service grows slowly over time. Faith transmission happens when we're putting our faith into action. So don't just teach them a lot of stuff, but then never give them a chance to put it into practice. But don't expect that I have to do it by going way out there somewhere. I can do it at home. I can do it when they're just a tiny little child. Hey, why don't we pick up all these Duplos that we got out and put them in the bucket and put them back in the closet where they belong? Wouldn't that be a nice thing to help mommy out that way. Yeah, let's do that, you know. And mommy comes, thank you so much for picking up your toys, you know. That's the kind, we ingrain that. Find people in your community that can help develop this idea of service. We talked about finding people with a common interest. You know, we have a child who is interested in cars, get them to have someone come help and work on cars. My dad, my child's grandparent, was great with this. He taught my kids how to work. When they came over to Grandpa's house, they would go out and they would rake leaves together, or he'd teach them how to drive the tractor so he made work fun. And he taught them the value of hard work and rewarded them for their hard work as well. You know, there was always a special treat at the end of the day, or words of affirmation and that kind of thing. Some of the adult friends that they had also taught them the value of hard work. Scott Baker, I mentioned before, he was our camp manager, and he held a high standard for my boys. When they would ride their bike down to the shop, it's a dirt road going down to the shop, and then it hits pavement. Well, it was really fun to slam your brakes on the bike and then skid your tires, and it sprayed gravel all over the pavement. And Scott one day saw all this gravel up on the pavement, and said, how did that happen? Oh, we were skidding our bikes, and handed them a rake and a shovel, clean it up. You know, and they still talk about that moment. You know, they were a little, oh, we're in trouble, but they weren't. I watched Scott do this with a couple of teenagers that were struggling to apply themselves at work, and they were not working hard, they were goofing off, and so on a Sunday, we were getting ready for the next group. We needed to set up some camp meeting tents there at camp to house some of our campers, and so he got these group of guys up early in the morning and said, you're with me all day, and this is what we're doing. You know, get dressed, let's go. And these four spent the whole day with Scott, working hard. And all day long, Scott was pouring into them the value of work, pouring into them life lessons. And one of them is a pastor in this conference now, and he still talks to me about that day and those moments with Scott Baker as he taught them the value of service. Really important stuff. So find these ways to get your kids involved in service. Some ideas to make that happen. Neighborhood dinner. I know a pastor. They started doing what they call the Hebrew Day Planner, which is, by the way, the Hebrew Day started in the evening, right? Evening to morning is the first day. That was in creation. And it starts in the evening because that's the time for relationships, which is the most important thing. So every evening, it started with them just sitting out on lawn chairs in their front yard, and as everyone drove by, they would wave, because they lived in a typical suburban neighborhood where people come home from work, they pull in the driveway, the door shuts behind them, you never see them again. So they would wave as they would drive by, and then people would stop and talk to them after a while. And then once they started building relationships, they told their neighbors, hey, every Tuesday night, you don't need an invitation, we're going to put an extra pot of soup on, and you are welcome to come for supper. No invitation, just show up between these times. And little by little, neighbors started showing up for dinner, and they got to know their neighbors. Such a cool idea. Project of the year, I love this. When your kids are older, this really works well. Let them research and choose a project. And each child on Christmas, somewhere over Christmas vacation, gets to write up a proposal. This is the project I think we as a family ought to do, and this is why. And every child makes that proposal, and the family gets to vote on what project they're going to do that year. Awesome. And they choose it, and they do it. Rice and beans Saturday, instead of fixing a fancy Sabbath dinner, just do rice and beans. Take the money that you were going to save and put it towards some kind of a project. You're welcome. They talked about the rite of passage. Sponsor a child. Compassion does this. Really cool thing. It's a great way to get kids involved in service. Volunteer at a local nonprofit. These are all ways to make that happen. Last thing, I wanted to talk about some of the barriers. I wanted to respond to a question you guys raised last night about interracial marriages and how that might affect faith transmission. I did some thinking about this, and I'll share with you my initial thoughts. What some might see as barriers, I think I see as a great opportunity here. The cool thing, my son and daughter-in-law are in this situation, and as I watch them, the cool thing is that each of them brings some really unique things into the marriage. And I've learned so much from my daughter-in-law about Hispanic culture and about how she sees the world and how she deals with issues that for me aren't issues, but whole sensitivity to being in a minority, which I, as a privileged majority person, never thought about. It's easy in a marriage to say, oh, we're going to take our differences and figure out how we're going to raise our kids, and we sort of take our differences and we water it down to this is what we're going to do. I'm wondering what would happen in a marriage with a lot of good communication, but we take our differences and rather than trying to find the common ground and water it down, but hold those differences and value them and respect them and say, there are traditions that Mom brings in to our family that we love. We love these things about her culture and what it does. And we love the way that her family worships or the way that she connects with God. And we can learn so much from that. But Dad brings all these really cool things, and we can hold these things in tension. We don't have to find a way to sort of bring it all, to make it all harmonized. No, we live in that tension and say, there are differences here, and we love those differences, and we value those differences because it brings a richness to our family. I think that kind of approach to a multiracial relationship on many levels is healthy, but I think it would create such a richness for your children to be able to understand and value the faith tradition from Mom and understand and value the faith tradition from Dad and be able to just bring all that richness into their own personal lives. So if I had some advice, that would be my advice to you is celebrate your differences, honor those differences, value them. You ought to, we did with our kids at Christmas time, we celebrated a whole month of December, one night a week, we would celebrate Christmas with a different ethnic traditions. And we would, it was fun for the kids because we got to celebrate Christmas all month long. It's a lot of food preparation for me, but it was good fun. But, bring that into your home in different ways. And I think your children will be blessed by it. And it teaches them to see differences not as things that divide us, but things that build us up as a community and enrich us, which is such an important lesson in our world today. So that would be my thought. Did that resonate at all? Or?
I love it. The only thing when they use the word tradition sometimes because it's a tradition, my father, your father, not necessarily is in my perception.
Mm-hmm.
We gotta also make sure that those traditions are
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And there are things, Scripture is always going to be the anchor point to what we do. But I think about the ways in which we worship. And there's a lot of tradition in the way we worship. They're not right or wrong. It's just this is the way we've grown up. I love going to various ethnic churches and worshiping in the ways that they do. I find there's a real, it expands my worship vocabulary, and so that's fun for me. And that's why I say traditions. Yeah, we don't want to cling to the things of man, so to speak, but I think we have faith perspectives and things that we do that could really enrich your home. So thoughts on that. Just a few things, and we don't need to talk about all these, but I want to acknowledge them. There is a massive increase in the rise of emotional and mental health issues in society in general, but within young people today. It is statistically huge. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but not quite the majority, but nearly the majority of young people today, by the time they're 18, will have some kind of diagnosable emotional or mental health issue, which is incredibly huge. Issues of anxiety, issues of depression, self-harm, suicidal ideation. These are all very, very real things. I wish that were the case. We have, in the camp world, we have taken every year hiring a mental health intern to just deal with those issues. And I remember the first year we had them, my mental health intern came into my office after the first week. This was 8 and 9-year-olds, by the way. And she said, she just broke into tears. And she said, I don't know how you do this summer after summer. She said, I've only been here a week, and I've had three 3 suicide checks, and these are 8, 9-year-olds. So how do you do this? That's the world we're living in. And I will say, be very aware of your children and what they're dealing with. Don't be afraid to get help. This is not a shame issue. This is not anything that you need to blame yourself for. It's just the world we live in. It's a very different world. And get help for yourself if you're dealing with some of these things. But make sure you're getting help as well. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is to be trained in mental health first aid. It's an 8-hour course. You can probably find it somewhere in your local community and take the time and get training. So you can understand if your child comes and says to you, I just feel like I want to end it all. You know what to do. And you know how to step in and ask the right questions and do the right things. I've had far too many of my friends lose children to suicide. It just breaks your heart. And it can happen in the very best of families and the very best of children. And so make sure you're getting help there. Marital strife and divorce can also be a huge issue. It doesn't mean that faith transmission can't happen, but it's a huge roadblock. If there are marital tensions, get help. If you're in a marriage that is toxic or unsafe for your children, get out. I hate to be blunt about that, but there are some times where it is no longer safe for your children to be in a home, or safe for you, perhaps. Keep in mind, however, as we think about divorce, for us as adults, when we get a divorce, it's hard, it's heartbreaking, it's painful, but we move on. For a child, it's an existential thing. Oh, those two were the ones that made me. And if they're no longer married, then who am I? And these are things that carry with them through a lifetime. So understand that you're going to move on, but your child won't. And you need to be willing to listen to your child if you've gone through a divorce and listen to their feelings, take it honestly. It'll be painful to hear what they're going through, but receive it and respond to it. I had a child tell me one time, and my parents got a divorce, and now my dad's married to some other person, and he's got a little girl, and I'm afraid that he's going to forget all about me. And I can't talk to anybody about it because my dad doesn't want to talk about it. My mom certainly doesn't want to talk about it. All my friends think I should be over it. And so what I do is I go in my room and I shut my door and I talk to my cat. That's all she had. So don't let your child be all alone and have those conversations. This is one we see more and more. My child just came out to me, just told me, I know you thought that you were raising a little girl, but I actually think I'm a boy, or I'm gay, or I'm lesbian. This happens far more than we think. For a moment, let's just set aside the biblical truths that we hold to on these issues. The issue of sin, the issue of all of that. Let's set it aside and ask ourselves, how do I need to respond to my child when those things happen? The statistics of children who come out to their parents and then are rejected is staggering and troubling. The incidences of suicide escalate exponentially in children who are rejected by their parents when they come out. So set aside the morality issue for a moment and say, how can I help my child to understand that they're loved and that I will walk with them in this journey? And that's going to be the first thing that you need to do. Those are heartbreaking things. I talked with a young lady this summer who came out to her parents, and her parents told her it would be better off if you'd never been born. And can you imagine carrying that and what that does to a child? So be careful with that. There are resources out there that you can look into. The other one here is my child just says that he or she no longer believes in God. We've talked about this one. But so think about those roadblocks. None of these are insurmountable. Using the tools of communication, connection, and warmth and grace, you can get through them. But we're about ready to wrap up. Is there any other questions that are burning in your mind before we close out? You've been very patient as we've slogged through the deep weeds today. I hope it's been helpful. Before we go, that's the wrong clicker. There we go. A couple of resources. Center for Parent and Youth Understanding. Fuller Youth Institute, Orange, Face Project, Parent Q. These are all great apps, great websites. This QR code will give you access to the slide deck that you just saw. So you can access all the links. My email is there as well as my cell phone. You can call or text me. Be happy to answer questions or have conversations. But feel free to scan that. You can get the slide deck, and hopefully that will give you some of the information that you may have missed as we went along. Anything else? We wrap up? Yeah. Oh, let me go back. Wait for people are scanning. I don't want to go back till we get all that done. Okay. Everybody go back. There's take a picture of that. As we close, I just want to pray for you all. Parenting is the most rewarding thing you're ever going to do. It's the hardest thing you're ever going to do. And there are going to be days where it's like, I love being a parent. And there's going to be days where it's like, oh, Lord, I can't do another day like this.
Just technical question. We went last summer over there at the camp, the lake, and we saw this kid, the coordinator was great. What is the minimum experience and age for them to do?
Oh, yeah. They can start coming to camp for overnight camp when they're 8. We do a couple weeks of day camp. You guys are close enough where that could work. Day camp starts as young as 5, and they come Monday through Friday from like 9 till 4. And so that's a great way to help your kids experience some of camp, but yet not have to stay overnight if they're not ready for that. So overnight, they have to be at least 8. Yeah. And we go 8 to 17. Yeah. 4, there we go. That's it. Good. Well, let me pray for you, and then we'll get on with our evening. Lord, I want to thank you for this time. We've spent some time today and dug deep, put a lot of tools and resources into our hands. But Lord, more than anything, we need you. We don't need an app or a website as much as we need you. And so I pray that you will be present in each person's lives, that your Spirit will be poured out in their homes and their marriages, and that your presence will be, and then in turn help our children to fall in love with you as well. So thanks, God, for what you've done here today and what you're going to continue to do in the lives of these parents in these homes. In your name we pray, amen. Oh, it's been a good day. Thanks so much for hanging with it, and reach out if you have any questions.